Good evening and welcome to Money Matters. My name is Charlie Huntington and I am the Chair of Public Relations for Life Sciences Pennsylvania. Life Sciences Pennsylvania is the voice of advancement for the Pennsylvania biomedical, medical device, CRO, and healthcare IT industries. Tonight we continue our special series on science leaders in our local community. But before we do so, I would like to remind our viewers that from time to time, financial issues relating to life sciences, healthcare, or technology matters or companies may be discussed on this show. These discussions are not and should not be viewed as financial advice. Moreover, since this program is recorded and shown at a later date, please keep in mind that the information may no longer be current. You should always check with your financial advisor before entering into any financial transaction. If you'd like to ask a question that we will answer on an upcoming episode, here's how you do it.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
I'm pleased to have with me tonight Kimon Hatza. Kimon is my co-host, good friend, and business attorney and partner at GrowthCounsel LLC in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His focus is in the life sciences, healthcare, and technology, information IT areas, I should say. Welcome, Kimon.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm glad to be here.
Kimon, can you bring our viewers up to speed with what's new in your practice since the last time we were together?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie, for that opportunity. Actually, kind of more of the same. Since the early days of the pandemic, we've been more or less gangbusters. A lot of deal flow. Currently, I'm working on a technology, actually a fairly large technology M&A transaction that hopefully will be ending the early part of next week. I also have a life sciences consulting company that's being sold, and that transaction is just getting underway. We have a lot of financing transactions in-house for early stage companies and a fair amount of outside general counsel work for our regular clients. So really gangbusters. It'll be interesting to see whether inflation and what's happening in the economy has any kind of an impact in the near term. But right now it's still pretty busy and good to see for the life sciences industry.
Thanks, Kimon. Well, as you know, we have an incredible guest tonight. Tonight's special guest is Caroline Hoedemaker. She is CEO and president and founder of Neoneur, a telehealth-enabled device that provides objective measurements of infant oral feeding capability and developmental status. Ms. Hoedemaker founded Neoneur in 2019. She's also founder and CEO of Raven Biomaterials. Prior to that, she held positions at iStat, J&J and M&A, as well as LifeCell Corporation, where she led their marketing team as they reached profitability. She also founded the TTAP Life Science Accelerator in 2015 and is a grant reviewer at TEDCO. She has a BA in biology and a minor in physics from Wells College in New York, a BSc in mechanical engineering from Tulane, and an MBA from Rutgers in finance. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. I look forward to our conversation.
How did you get into this business?
So back in 2015, I formed an accelerator because I wanted to get back into sort of leading roles with interesting companies. And I kept going out looking for companies to work with. And I found that there were a great resource in the Philadelphia area of executives who were out there putting up shingles and trying to figure out how to engage with companies. And so I formed this accelerator around wrapping executives around interesting technologies. And lo and behold, one of those technologies that came to one of our workshop sessions that we did for screening and building teams was Dr. Medoff Cooper. And that was the beginning of it. She was at that point in time just a technology at the University of Pennsylvania, but had a really interesting device that we thought could help babies.
So tell us about that device and tell us about Neoneur.
Yeah, so Neoneur is a handheld device. It fits between a nipple and a bottle, and it's used to, you use it when you feed the baby. We then collect the data that's collected in here is collected and transmitted to a mobile device, and then the computation is done in the cloud. And what is really fantastic about it, we're a startup company, we're out of UPenn and CHOP, is that we have 1,200 patients worth of data already.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Caroline, does the device require FDA approval?
So yeah, so we use the device. So infant feeding is really different than what it is for adult feeding. So infants have to put together a coordinated suck, swallow, and feeding pattern, and that pattern is driven by their brainstem, and all of it can be monitored. So it's a feeding pattern that's monitored to look at when infants should be, particularly at risk infants, when they're developing normally or when they are at risk. It's actually one of the leading criteria that infants have for discharge. So you ask, is it FDA approved? So yes, we are focused first on the area where infants have the highest degree of risk, and that would be in the neonatal intensive care unit. And in the neonatal intensive care unit, babies are, particularly these high-risk babies, are stabilized first for temperature control, and then respiratory control, and how well the heart is beating. And then the last piece that the babies really have to master and be safe to be discharged is whether or not they have reached a developmental status in which they can put together this pattern. Again, it's different than adults. They have to suck, swallow, and breathe in continuity for periods at a time. And once they reach that stage, they can be discharged. Well, often that's a hurdle that can take weeks before discharge. And they're kept because the only really good evaluation is by what's called feeding therapists. And these are people who are employees of the hospital, and their job is to feed babies and to monitor how well they're being able to put together this coordinated pattern. And so we believe the Neoneur will enable the feeding therapist to do a better job, but also enable these babies to at times go home earlier. So is this baby ready to be discharged? Can we discharge this baby safely? Can we monitor them when they're at home if we need to? And the Neoneur enables all of that. So it's about getting babies home safely without really risking readmission.
Many of our guests on the show who have early stage companies and need FDA approval have years of clinical trials to go through. You mentioned that you have a lot of data already. So I was wondering if that will shorten the amount of time you need to spend in clinical trial before you can move to commercialization of your product.
Yeah, so we met with the FDA about a year ago, and we had a really good meeting. And our planned intent is to move forwards with a FDA submission using the 510K avenue or path, and using our past data to help them understand how the Neoneur works. We actually don't believe we need to collect additional data. Of course, the FDA may change their mind on that and send us to collect additional data. But we've got an ongoing. We're just about to start up another clinical trial in which we will capture additional data anyway. So we hope to submit to the FDA late second quarter this year.
For our viewers that aren't familiar, would you describe briefly what a 510K is?
Yeah, that's not so easy to do.
All right, I'm sorry if that's.
Oh, a 510K is, so when you submit to the FTA, you typically submit, there's actually three major routes. One is called a PMA, and a PMA is what you would submit with a clinical trial for a therapeutic. All of the therapeutic, you go to the FDA and you plan your trial and you submit your trial to the FDA and they approve it, and then you collect the data, and then you submit the results to them. And usually they take years. 510K is, there's a device that does something similar to yours on the marketplace already, or you're a non-significant risk device, and with a predicate. And you go to the FDA and you ask them and you say, I said I met with the FDA before, so we met with them a year ago. We actually spoke with them again earlier this year. You meet with the FDA and they say, we think we're a 510K device. And they say yes or no. We think you're a 510K device. They don't say absolutely, because the FDA never says anything absolutely. They say, yeah, we think you're a 510K device. And so now you have to show that all of your functionality is equivalent or similar to that predicate device. And because of that, you can submit just showing that equivalent data. And that's what we're going to do on the benchtop.
It's a way to expedite. It's an expedited process.
Oh, it's much expedited. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Who are your competitors in the industry, if you have any at this time? I mean, you don't have to name by name, but what kinds of things are they doing?
So it's interesting. So our top competitor, if you will, is these feeding therapists. And I wouldn't say they're a competitor, because I actually think they're going to facilitate our use in the marketplace. When you think about a stethoscope or an EKG monitor, before you had an EKG monitor, what did they do? Right before you had a stethoscope, they put their ear to your chest and they listened for your heart rate. They do the same thing right now for feeding. So they observe the baby. I remember when I have two children, and when I delivered those children and they were full term, completely healthy, they still came up and they tapped my shoulder and they said, "So, how's your baby doing? Are they eating well? Do you think they ate a full amount?" And I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about at that point in time. And so they do that, but they do that for all these babies anyway. And so there is no tool to measure really. And even when you talk to feeding therapists, they're like, it's really hard. And they're hired to do this job, right? Their job is to feed babies. They're hired in to feed babies 24/7, nothing else. That's what they do. Because the neonatologists and the nurses and the clinical staff, they recognize it's hard to do this. Then you need a lot of practice. So here we're taking a qualitative assessment and we're quantifying it. And when we show the results and the charts that we produce to the feeding therapists, they're really interested in seeing those. So we think it is a way to really help the feeding therapist population. There is one other device out there that measures one aspect of feeding. It's called the NFANCH. So that's a competitor in the marketplace. But to me, it's a competitor that's whetting the appetite for something that's better to come.
Okay. What would you say is the long-term vision for your technology?
So feeding isn't a static event. We talk about it being developmental. So we have data out of Dr. Menoff Cooper. She's got 4 R01s, which is a really big research grant worth of material in our database. And because of that, we can actually collect patterns and we can see how these patterns change as infants mature. So full term is 40 weeks gestational age. But infants are born as early as 23 weeks gestational age now. They typically don't start, just amazing, kind of scary to me. They'll start feeding on a tube feeding initially, and then they'll transition. So this feeding pattern develops late in gestation, about 34 to 36 weeks. And that's when it starts being developed. When you think about an infant and everything that changes between when they're born and 2 years, and you think about all of the changes as they transition to oral feeding, solid feeding, and speech, all of those is sort of a continuity of the things that are happening in your oral cavity. So we have data where we can track it from about 30 weeks to about 44 weeks, so about a month old. We look at that transition as being a developmental market. We don't know if we'll see how people are actually use it and where it is in the marketplace, but that's how we view it. And so our long-term vision and our long-term goal is, can we help physicians identify infants that might need a little bit more monitoring, right? So, you know what? This baby's developed a little slowly. Let's monitor this baby a little bit more. Let's make sure we check in with their developmental status before they're 2 years of age. Because if there's a developmental issue, can we flag it earlier and catch it earlier? Can you do ABA therapy or another therapeutic earlier? So that's our long-term vision of where we think we're going.
How do you go about protecting intellectual property for a product like this?
Yeah, so we are fortunate that we have issued patents behind the device, and we are collecting it. We are filing for some more patents around the technology. But, there's other ways that you have intellectual property too. So it's called intellectual property, not just patents, because it's that. So our database that we have of prior clinical data, that's a really valuable component of our intellectual property. Another component of our intellectual property is, what do we do with that data? How do we analyze that data? How can we show comparisons to a developmental age, for example, using that? So all of that is we consider intellectual property.
How are you funded currently?
So currently we are angel funded predominantly, but we just received a significant phase 1-2 SBIR grant. And for those that aren't familiar with SBIR grants, these are federally funded grants to stimulate the technology's advancement to the commercial space. So typically a company will file for a phase 1 grant, which is a smaller grant. And once they've completed that, they can apply for a phase 2 grant, which is a more significant grant. This is a grant that will support our evaluation of how the device will be used in the clinical marketplace for about 2.5 years.
Great.
Caroline, when do you see commercialization on the horizon for Neoneur?
So as I mentioned before, we're hoping to get to the FDA, our application process, by the end of Q2. Maybe it's Q3, but I'm still shooting for the end of Q2. If that's the case, the FDA can take anywhere from 30 days to a year to turn stuff around between the back and forth. But I'm hopeful that before the end of this year, we'll be actually entering the marketplace.
Good for you. What would success look like in 5 years for you and for Neoneur?
So, I mentioned where we're starting. So we are starting looking at care for the infants that have the biggest risks. And that would be those that are in what's called the level 4 neonatal intensive care unit. Those are children that are cared for example, at CHOP in Philadelphia. We think it will go from there to the level 3 NICU. And then there's another really big another population called late premature infants, where these infants are born premature, but they seem okay. They seem normal, and they're still cared for as well baby infants. That's actually the second biggest population that needs monitoring, because they're discharged and they have the highest rate. Their readmission rate is frequently due to failure to thrive or growth issues. So 5 years from now, I hope 5 years from now, we've got some real demonstrated traction. We've got some interest from some major players, and are looking to either how to blow out our utilization of our product worldwide, or potentially partner with a larger company.
Caroline, if you'll indulge me for a minute and let me turn to something more on the personal side. When we met initially, you mentioned that both of your kids are engineers like you, and I was wondering how that came about.
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. I like to think, they're a chip off the old block. But part of me says it's, my husband's always been very scientific and doing engineering stuff in the basement. I think he has more influence over them than I do. And I can say the one that, where they end up, I don't know. They keep telling me that they're concerned about what am I going to be at the end of the day when I grow up, and I stuck in this, and I'm like, no, you want to be a lawyer, go be a lawyer. You want to go right, go right. But my only advice to them was, if you're not sure what you're going to do the hardest thing you can think of in college, because you can always go another route. And I think they listen to that, and that's what they're doing right now. So we'll see.
A lot of hard work for engineers in college, that's for sure. One other question on the personal side. You mentioned that you are a sailboat racer, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, how that came about, and the kind of racing that you do.
That is a genetic flaw that we have in our family. I have to admit. So my father was an avid racer. My brother's an avid racer. My sisters both sail. So we've always raced sailboats. I met my husband through racing sailboats. And it's like any pastime. It's something that we enjoy. We like getting out on the water. We like the competitive aspect of it, rather than just cruising. I will say, but it gives you a different thing to focus on. So I really enjoy the break, if you will, from I'm full time on my companies, and so I enjoy actually stepping aside every now and then.
Okay. Changing back to our original subject matter, but a little bit more. Let's pulling back a little bit into talking about the region. There are a lot of folks out there, and some of whom we've had as guests on our show, who are thinking about starting a company around technology with which they're familiar. And I was wondering if you have any advice for folks who are thinking about starting a business like that.
You have to love it, and be ready to love it, because people are going to think you're crazy and they're going to tell you to stop. But if you really, that would be one. The second would be, seek people who complement you, not people who are the same as you, but people who complement you. If you're a lab person, find somebody outside of the lab. If you're not a lab person, find somebody in the lab. If you're not financially oriented, find somebody financially, or build yourself a team around you, even if it's an informal advisory group that meets once a quarter and you buy them a beer. It is tremendously helpful, both from a perseverance perspective and a morale perspective, but also because they're going to give you good advice that you're not going to think of. And you know what? There are lots of people in the Philadelphia region. People always, it's not this richest region. I'm like, Philadelphia's great. People are there.
And then speaking of Philadelphia and the life sciences and industry, what would you say are the biggest challenges or the biggest opportunities for the Philadelphia area in terms of sustaining a vibrant life sciences and medical device community?
I've been on this soapbox about Philadelphia for a long time, because there's no money in Philadelphia. I'm like, get off your soapbox and just go knock on the doors. They just don't want to write the checks right away because we're conservative. But I think we've got a great community. Honestly, we've got such talent with the universities. We've got such talent with people with in the support services. We've got academic institutions. We've got medical institutions. You know what? You got to go out and talk to people, and really you'll find they're willing to help you. And that's what I've found. And I think that's what you would find if you just go and, you be humble and have a conversation, and people are really nice, I think, in the Philly area.
Caroline, you have been a wonderful guest. We know that you are an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs start multiple companies, which you have done. We'd love to have you back to talk about another company one of these days, I'm sure. But thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I want to remind our viewers that next week, Nancy Cochran of Online Recording Network will be the guest on Money Matters. And as always, Kim, and I want to thank you for co-hosting. You were great.
Thanks, Charlie.
You're welcome. And as always, we remind you that your money matters, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.